BlogTalk Radio.
Welcome. This is Andy Marino with the AME Food Testing Show. Today's guest is Bill William Jaspers. His experience is listed in our outline today as his education has 2 Bachelor of Science degrees from the University of Minnesota, St. Paul. The first is in food science, and the second is in plant and animal protection. The latter bachelor's is a combination of entomology, plant pathology, agronomy, and soil science. His experience is broken down into 3 areas: quality assurance management in several food production companies, food safety consulting in the U.S. and Canada, inspecting over 1,500 food facilities, including cold storage, warehouses, grocery distribution centers, grocery stores, many different types of food manufacturers, including salt mines, meat plants, poultry processors, bakeries, dairies, canneries, aseptic operations, seafood processors, and hotel kitchens, airline caterers, and food packaging manufacturers. Bill is also a former public health inspector for 3 public health departments, conducting more than 9,000 restaurant inspections. Also, he's conducted plan reviews for new and remodeled facilities. He's issued citations and served as an expert witness concerning food code violations. Bill has also developed a vendor approval program for a major meat company. It also included the construction and maintenance sections as well for microbiological commissioning and listeria control. Bill will explain that later. He's also recently worked with Dr. Pete Schneider of the Hospitality Institute of Technology and Management in St. Paul on a project to help ethnic food provider comply with FDA injunction. They were selling eviscerated fish over 5 inches. This is more than somewhat disturbing or disgusting. It's botulism, and the hazard is because the fish is dried or smoked. Dr. Schneider is an internationally known food safety expert recognized by the FDA and retained by the firm to help bring them into compliance. Let's see if we can welcome Bill to our interview. And Bill, are you there?
Wow, yes. Thank you for that nice intro, Andy.
Well, would you like to add anything else to it?
Oh, well, the term was uneviscerated fish. In other words, they didn't take the guts out of it. And since it's an ethnic food supplier, it was not uncommon for their customers to eat them that way because of the areas of the world that they came from. But it is a botulism hazard because the fish is dried or smoked.
You know, that brings up an excellent point about the formulation of a risk-based food safety plan. Can you review your thoughts on that? With all your experience having been a public health inspector and working for companies and more recently performing audits and designing systems.
Oh, sure. The formulation of a risk-based food safety plan, I'll use my most recent employer as an example. Dr. Snyder developed their HACCP plan, and the company was a fruit and nut company based in St. Paul. I was hired to be their quality control manager, and part of my duties were to review and update the HACCP plan. The company roasted 8 different kinds of nuts in high oleic sunflower oil and packaged the same with dried fruits and candies. They also did fresh cut processing of fruits and vegetables. They sold produce wholesale and distributed many food products. Now, with all of those different activities going on, there were quite a few different risks to manage, including potential salmonella contamination of environmental and food contact surfaces in the nut area, as well as listeria in the fresh cut area. And while I was reviewing the HACCP plan to see what needed to be updated or added, I discovered that the company had a 1.5-page recall program. Now, I thought to myself that it would be kind of tough to conduct an actual recall based on this, so I set about developing one for them. It took about 3 months, and right after it was completed, the Salmonella St. Paul outbreak in July, I believe it was, of 2008 occurred. This was initially thought to be on tomatoes, but FDA tested over 2,000 tomato samples and never found a single positive. We did get a break in the case, though, when a man in Denver got sick with the Outbreak strain, and it happened that he had purchased some fresh jalapeno peppers from an area Walmart not long before and happened to have a few left in his refrigerator. They also tested positive for the Outbreak strain, so that's how it was identified as having been on jalapeno peppers. Now, my employer did a very small volume in that item, jalapeno peppers, but it happened that we had 2 restaurants, each of which purchased 1 5-pound bag of diced jalapenos to use as a garnish. And one of the restaurants had 27 people become ill with the Outbreak strain, and there were no illnesses at the other one. Now, the traceback coordinator at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture identified my employer as having supplied the peppers to those restaurants. However, by the time this was determined, the product had already been consumed, so there wasn't anything to recall, but he also traced the source of the peppers all the way back to a specific farm in Mexico, and that was quite a feat considering all of the mix and match that goes on all the way along the line from the farmer to the processor, because many times jalapeno peppers or various pieces of fruit or produce or vegetables will get taken out of one lot, put into another, and they're not individually identified, so it makes it really difficult to identify where it came from, but he did manage to do it and did a marvelous job, I might add. Well, not long afterward, the MDA, Minnesota Department of Agriculture inspectors came in and did swabs to look for salmonella in our fresh cut area. It was very unlikely they would find it, though, since the room was kept at 85% relative humidity and between 38 and 40 degrees. Now, as any food processor who's been in the business very long knows, we took shadow samples right behind them. Anytime a regulatory agency comes in and takes samples, you need to be taking shadow samples right behind them. And I would say both MDA's and our samples were negative for any form of salmonella. Now, in late January of 2009, the PCA outbreak happened. PCA is Peanut Corporation of America. They sold a lot of peanuts all over the country, and it went in many, many products. Here in Minnesota, 3 deaths were attributed to salmonella-contaminated peanuts produced by PCA because King Nut Company had made their peanuts into peanut butter, and it went to a very high-risk population in nursing homes. As a result of the PCA outbreak, some 9 people died, at least 715 confirmed cases were identified, and CDC estimates that for every case we know about, there's 38 that we don't know about, so do the math on that. And roughly 4,400 products had to be recalled because of this. It was one of the largest outbreaks in U.S. history. So you asked about a risk-based safety plan. Well, a good HACCP plan identifies those risks, and I can say more about that later if you like, but I will say this, since we did have 1,900 pounds of PCA product in our warehouse, we had to destroy it, of course, and we had to conduct a recall of their products because some we roasted in high oleic sunflower oil and some we packaged as raw peanuts and with other raw nuts to make mixed nuts and other mixes. It took about 2 months to do that recall, to actually identify where everything went and get back what hadn't been sold. But that's an example of how a risk can really get out of hand. And one of the things that I worked with Dr. Snyder on was to identify whether or not the oil roast process we used was sufficient to kill salmonella. We piggybacked off an Almond Board of California validation study, which stated that almonds that are roasted in oil for 2 minutes or longer at 260 degrees is sufficient to achieve a 5-log salmonella kill. So I repeated that experiment using peanuts, wrote it up, submitted it to FDA, and they approved it. So we did not have to recall the roasted peanuts. But that's quite a bit of information on risk management and where it didn't go too right.
Well, Bill, your experience on both of those recalls brings out a couple of very important points. Number one, you developed a recall plan. You came, there was a one-page document. How many pages did you finish with by the time you put your input into the existing plan?
Oh boy, with all the supporting documentation and standardized forms on company letterhead and things like that, I suppose it was probably in the neighborhood of 150 pages maybe. The actual recall program itself was no more than about 8 pages, but still, you have to have all the supporting documentation. If somebody calls in and says, well, I ate your mixed nuts and I got sick, you got to start asking them certain types of questions. And then you also examine your customer complaints, other ones that you've got, to see if there's any similarities. If you can identify a particular ingredient that might have caused the problem, assuming that it is a legitimate one, you might have to go back to the supplier. So there's a number of things that really have to be done when somebody claims they've gotten ill on a product.
Well, that's particularly interesting that you raised that. Those food safety managers that are out there in the industry practicing and that have a minimal plan, upon this experience, would you suggest them going back and reviewing their programs?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's face it, we live in a world that is full of risk. Nobody ever thinks about it, but you can break your ankle getting on a bed. It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened, and the odds against it are pretty steep, but they aren't zero. Any statistician will tell you there is no such thing as zero. So what we can do in terms of food safety and food quality is keep improving things to the point where the likelihood of someone getting ill or even breaking a tooth on foreign material is so slight that it won't be non-existent, but it won't happen very often. And unfortunately, if you look at the FDA's and USDA's recall pages and e-food alerts, you'd think that recalls are happening constantly to every company in the business. There are a lot of them, but the trend is downward for the most part on most of them. But when they happen, particularly those involving organisms such as Salmonella or Listeria or E. coli 015787, the consequences can be very devastating. Matter of fact, there was a dance instructor from St. Cloud, about 75 miles north of Minneapolis here, who became paralyzed and will have to be on some sort of health management system for the rest of her life after consuming E. coli 0157H7 contaminated ground beef from a major meat company.
Well, Bill, you also raised another fascinating point that you indicated in your experience. It was a good idea if your facility is ever audited by government agents and they collect samples, to also collect shadow samples. Can you illuminate on that?
Oh, certainly. That simply means you sample the same area they did. Now, what could be a result is it is technically possible that they could pick up the organism they're sampling for, Salmonella, Listeria, whatever, and you could not because they got all that was there. It probably doesn't happen very often, but in both cases that I cited in our facility where MDA came in to sample for Salmonella in the fresh cut area, and FDA came in and took 110 environmental samples looking for Salmonella after the PCA outbreak. We took shadow samples in all cases, and both the regulatory agency and our samples turned out negative. So it's a very good idea, and any company lawyer will advise you to do the same thing.
So, Bill, you finally, in this section, you mentioned that you had submitted a protocol after conducting your own experimentation and essentially piggybacking off a similar industry's sterilization or firewall, and then submitted that to the FDA. Can you review that briefly again?
Oh, certainly. It's not a sterilization. Perhaps I should go into some definitions here. Sanitization is the destruction of any organisms that can make you sick on a food contact surface. Disinfection is destruction of any organism on a non-food contact surface. Commercial sterility, which is a term that's used for canned goods, isn't sterility at all, but it is the elimination of organisms that survive the canning process that can make you sick. Total sterility is the absence of all microorganism life. Now, what you mentioned was the Almond Board of California. I can go into some detail on this. There were, in fact, a couple of Salmonella outbreaks on raw almonds, I believe in 2000 or 2001 and 2005. And if my understanding is correct, it was the Almond Board of California that actually petitioned the FDA to require all domestic almonds to be pasteurized. Well, okay, well and good. There's two ways to do that. There is steam pasteurization, which is what most people mean when they talk about pasteurization using heat, or cold pasteurization, which is what USDA terms it. This uses a chemical called propylene oxide, which happens to be, or used to be, an ingredient in dragster fuels. It's also used to make thermobaric bombs, and it happens to be toxic. And if you look at an MSDS sheet for this stuff, it makes you wonder why they would approve it for direct use on food, but they do. Anyway, the validation study that was done on oil roasting almonds showed, as I mentioned, that if you roast the almonds in oil for 2 minutes or longer at 260 degrees or higher, you will get a 5-log reduction in salmonella, and that is considered to be good safe. Now, it isn't sterility. There may still be some there, but there won't be very darn many of them. That's about as far as I'd like to go with that.
Okay, well, the issue is that you had an issue in your production. You engaged your resources, proposed those study results to the FDA, received approval, and engaged that for the production of your food product. That's an outstanding process for a food producer to approach an agency, receive approval, and then engage that process. You know, as we look at food production, there are 2 types of food safety audits that go hand in hand with risk-based analysis. Those are both internal and external food safety audits. With your experience in over 1,500 food production facilities and 9,000 restaurants, can you review that briefly, the importance of internal and external food safety audits?
Oh, you bet. We conducted monthly internal audits at my last employer and all the food companies that I work for, actually. And it is a good way of identifying flaws in your system, things that need to be fixed. It might be something as simple as a hole in the wall someplace, which is not something you want because it could be a rodent harborage. But also that an internal audit has value because you can get different people to do it and different people see different things. Now, external audits have some value too, but as anybody who's undergone very many of them will tell you, it'll drive you wacky sometimes because there are so many auditing companies out there and they follow so many different systems that a lot of it is similar, but some of the things they come up with, they're unusual. Let's put it that way. For instance, one company that was doing an audit for a potential customer wanted to see our new ACA log, and I said, "Do you want to see what?" They said a new ACA log. That's an acronym that stands for Notice of Unusual Occurrence and Corrective Action. And the types of things that you would put on it would typically be a power outage. You put down the date it happened and the length of time and what you did to correct it and any way it might have messed up your production. So it certainly can have an impact on your HACCP plan and your food safety. But external audits do, as I said, have value, but the fact that there are so many different types out there, there are so many of them that go into more depth than others. It would be really nice if we could ever get to the point where there is one national standard. And the Food Marketing Institute has such a thing that they're working on. It's called FQS. That's SQF, use the wrong acronym. That stands for Safe Quality Food. And what it is a national standard that uses the same standards across the range of everything. All the food companies that produce various things from farm to fork, you might say. And the beauty of this system is that it has a national standard. It's being recognized by more and more food companies, and more food companies are going SQF. There is a national register for it, so you can go on the SQF SQFI, that's Safe Quality Food Institute website, and find manufacturers that are certified as level 2 or level 3. Level 1 is prerequisites, everybody's got those. Level 2 means you've got a qualified and very functional HACCP program, and level 3 means you've gone even a step further with quality management. Your food quality program follows HACCP principles, and they've got a very interesting little risk analysis to conduct too. So it's something that I think every food manufacturer should give consideration to, because it looks like a really viable program. And one nice thing about it is it's part of the GFSI, or the Global Food Safety Initiative. That also includes such things as BRC, which is British Retail Consortium, and some other things. But the idea is they're all following essentially the same standards. And suppliers that have mainly domestic business would probably want to go SQF. Suppliers that have overseas business would probably want to do BRC. Now, I don't mean to be giving a commercial for either of these things, but they do have more value, I would say, than most food safety systems, simply because they're very standardized, and the auditors that are qualified to do the audits for these systems have to have experience in the specific areas that they're auditing. Now, I can cite an example where that was kind of a mistake. During the PCA audit, the Blakely, Georgia
that's the
plant
Peanut Corporation of America, right, Bill?
Yes, Peanut Corporation of America. The Blakely, Georgia plant was inspected by an inspector from the American Institute of Baking, a very well-respected food safety third-party auditor. Unfortunately, the guy they sent in had a great background in fruits and vegetables, but he knew nothing about peanuts. And he overlooked some very, very obvious things: holes in roofs, puddles of water inside the facility, and so on and so forth. So it didn't give AIB a very good reputation from doing that, and because PCA got a superior rating on this audit, they thought they didn't have any problems. Well, not quite. We all know what happened after that. And no auditor that I am aware of, excuse me?
Bill, you raised two fascinating issues. One, is increased documentation an indication of safer finished food product? And two, I'd like you to answer that one, and then we'll go back to the other question, which is a superior audit result something we can rely on from a consumer point of view?
Well,
let's go with the
to your first point, increased documentation indicating a good food safety system, well, yes, but you have to look at more than just the documentation. For instance, a well-run HACCP plan has lots and lots of documentation, but you have to go out on the floor and actually talk to the people who are supposed to be performing the checks and find out how much they really know about what they're doing or what they're being asked to do, and if they're doing it the way it's supposed to be done. So increased documentation, yes, certainly can indicate a better, not perfect, but certainly a better system for food safety. Now, no auditor that I'm aware of takes micro samples of the environment or the product, so there might be a lot of reasons for that. But I suspect that it would add to the audit cost, and depending on what organism is being tested for, it can take 1 to several days to get the results, and even then, what would the results tell you if any of them were positive for specific bacteria?
Great.
So your next point was what?
Yes, the other question was, does a superior or a very high auditor's rating also convert to quality food as a finished product?
Not necessarily. For one company that I work for as quality manager, we got a very high rating from an auditor. He was a very nice guy, but I even told management about it, too, after he left. We got a 97%. That's terrific. What bothered me about it was he never asked to see a single completed HACCP document, not one. So how could he know that we really did that well? I mean, management was very happy about it because they like to get high grades. It's great for advertising, that sort of thing. But honestly, I didn't feel that the audit did us any favor because it gave us an unnecessarily high mark.
Well, I offer the two examples recently. I think we're all painfully aware about the Jensen Farm cantaloupe experience. They received an audit from a Primus auditor. I think it was a 97 or a 99 out of 100. And you also mentioned the PCA, Peanut Corporation of America's audit, which they received a superior, and yet that product was also contaminated with a pathogenic organism. So you're saying Go ahead.
I don't know the details of the Jensen audit, but I rather suspect that, like the AIB audit on PCA, that they didn't take environmental or product samples for micro. It just isn't a normal part of most audits.
Well,
so
I agree with you. And, you know, Bill, you had asked me on a previous conversation about a new technology that is out there as differentiated from traditional technologies. I'm sure you're aware with your 2 bachelor's degrees of the traditional microbiological methods of a sample collection and a culture growth media technology, which requires anywhere from 2 to 14 days, depending on the organism, to return a result, which must be interpreted by a trained microbiologist. Then there are ATP studies, as well as pulse field gel electrophoresis studies, as well as polymers chain reaction studies. Can you comment on your experience with those 4 levels of technology?
Well, I am not a microbiologist, so I don't know as much about them as a person who is a practicing microbiologist, but you are correct in that the standard methods of sample collection and growth of the organism do require culturing and interpretation. Now, you can either use pour plates, as anybody who's been at the U a long time ago, or at any school that taught microbiology, that's what you did. You made up your media, you melted it out, and poured it in your plates, let it solidify, then culture your organism, and depending on what you were culturing, you had to have various types of nutrients in it. Then along came Petri film, which simplified the task greatly. It's not inexpensive, but it is a very useful product. And you get a bit more technical. This is where you require some pretty extensive and expensive pieces of equipment in a micro lab, where you get pulse field gel electrophoresis, and further down the line, which is almost like DNA fingerprinting, is PCR, polymerase chain reaction. And that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe PCR will correctly typically identify, 90% of the time, the organism within like an hour or so?
You're correct. The issue is specificity and sensitivity. The culture media standard sensitivity and specificity runs about 67 to 70%, and that has been termed as the gold standard because it's been around so long. The other ATPs is about the same. Some people claim it's up to 80%. The pulse field cell electrophoresis, on the other hand, is in the 90 to 99%, and polymerase chain reaction, or PCR analysis, is closer to 99% specificity sensitivity for a specific strain of organism. Go ahead.
And I imagine that's what the Minnesota Department of Health used when they identified Salmonella St. Paul on the produce outbreak in 2008. We have an interesting group of people working there called by both the department and the media, Team Diarrhea. What they are is graduate students that do all the phone interviews and things with people that have come in contact with the material that is thought to cause an outbreak, and they've really broken some major cases, that being one of them.
Well, Bill, you've reviewed a number of areas. Let's get down to the meat of our discussion today, which is surviving an FDA audit and how is the appropriate, in your experience, again, and it still astounds me, 1,500 food production facilities, 9,000 food serving restaurant facilities, and what is, in your experience, the best way to either prepare for or in the horrible event of, and you've had this experience, of responding to an on-site FDA audit post a food pathogen outbreak and recall?
Well, the easiest way to deal with that is cooperate with them and answer their questions. And now with the passage of the Food Safety Modernization Act, which became law under the President's signature last January 4th, they now have the legal authority to request to see any document or any program you have, and they can also order a recall. Now, it would be wise for any company to cooperate with the FDA, to a lesser extent the USDA, and any local or state agencies too when they're requesting information following an outbreak. And that is exactly what we did. I mean, yes, it's definitely not a pleasant experience to have them come in and take all those samples, and you know exactly what they're looking for, but cooperate with them. They have a difficult job to begin with, FDA in particular, because there's nowhere near as many inspectors as they really need. They are underfunded, they're understaffed, and they have to cover about 80% of the food products sold and consumed in this country. So all I can say is you need to cooperate with them and work with them. And in conducting the PCA recall, it took about 2 months. I spent a lot of time on the phone with the local FDA recall coordinator, and they will give you some tips on things to do, and you have to request when to end the recall when you think you've got everything covered that went out. And, well, I didn't get a break there for a while because right after PCA got done, it was setting pistachio for the same darn thing, salmonella, and then hazelnuts, and then something else, and then something else after that. So it seemed like all I was doing for a long time was just recalls. But back to the question about how to respond to it, just cooperate with them. be as pleasant as you can. It's stressful for everybody. They don't like it any better than you do. But if you cooperate with them and show them the documents they want to see and everything you've done, your due diligence, if you will, on what you did to prevent problems, things will go a lot easier for you. Now, there was a guy out in New Jersey, I believe, during the PCA audit that I saw refuse to recall the product the FDA wanted him to recall. Well, at the time, they didn't have the legal authority to force him to do a recall, but they can make you wish you did one. I don't know if he's still in business or not, but they tighten the screws on him pretty tough. That's not very smart. You need to be cooperative with these people. They're just trying to do a good job. They are trying to protect the public health, and it is incumbent on everyone in the food industry who processes or handles food in any way to do it safely and to do everything they can to do it safely.
Well, Bill, I'm sure your audience today is appreciative of your contribution to the industry, particularly your advice on these FDA post-food pathogen outbreaks and recalls. You mentioned a minute ago that when you receive a request to conduct an FDA audit, that there is a recall coordinator for your region, and how it was good to have a relationship with that individual. What kind of relationship would you suggest that would be most productive under those circumstances?
Well, first of all, keep it professional, but don't be afraid to talk to that person, because they're usually dealing with more than just you, particularly in something the size of a PCA recall. It was all over the country, and over 4,400 products had to be recalled by hundreds of companies. So our recall coordinator was dealing with several at the same time, and just be patient, work with them. They will give you instructions. They'll tell you what they want you to do. In many cases, if you've got the product on hand, you will probably be asked to destroy it with witnesses. That was another thing I had to do for the recall program, was create a certificate of destruction. And the way those things normally work is you write down the whatever the food product is, why it's being destroyed, who requested it, and you need to have 3 witnesses, usually a person in charge, which in this case was me, and 2 other witnesses, and it's a good idea to take digital photographs and attach them to that too. Well, we had 1,900 pounds of PCA product, peanuts, in our warehouse that we had to destroy, so we had to do it in that manner and present evidence to FDA that we did. So that's what I say, work with them.
Excellent. You also mentioned an interesting comment about requesting the end of the recall. That's something you, as the food producer, had to initiate.
Right. Well, at that point, when you think you've got everybody that you can identify that may have gotten the questionable product identified, then you need to request the closure of the recall. You tell FDA, your recall coordinator, that you think you've got it all, and here's what we'd like to do. And they will generally go along with what you suggest.
You know, Bill, as we talk about this experience of having actual FDA recalls, it really brings up the importance and the relevancy of a mock recall. What would be your suggestions to a food safety manager on the frequency and the intensity of mock recalls?
Well, I've seen various suggestions in different inspectional schemes. Certainly a company should be doing them annually. It's a traceability exercise. Now, in BRC, the British Retail Consortium, which I'm honestly not that familiar with, they say there is a difference between a mock recall and a traceability exercise. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I will say this. They want you to go one up and one back, meaning if you produced a product and sent it out to 20 distributors, for instance, you need to go to 20 beyond that. And same thing with your suppliers. If you had 5 different ingredients that went into it, you need to contact all the suppliers, and you go a lot either side of the lot that you can identify as an ingredient for your traceability exercise, and you need to time it. Ordinarily, it's considered to be very good if you can identify where everything went in less than 4 hours. And it will keep people on their toes. You should be doing those things unannounced. People can get ready for them in some ways if they know they're coming, but if all of a sudden you work it out with top management and it's kind of hush-hush, you say, okay, we've just had to do a recall on this. Tell me where it went. But you should be able to do that in 4 hours or less.
Outstanding. When you mention contact the suppliers, is that email, phone, an actual letter, or a personal visit?
Well, you might have to employ all of those methods to get in touch with them, but I would suggest a phone call first. We had to do some cantaloupe recalls for listeria contamination that we were notified by a fax from the Central American supplier. So it can be done that way too. But if it's a Class 1 recall, which is one that involves microorganisms generally that can cause serious illness, salmonella and E. coli and all that, you need to get the word out as quickly as possible. Now, in the case of the PCA recall, we prepared a letter that said recall notice in big red letters and emailed it to everybody so they knew about it right away. Then we had our sales staff go out and actually contact each one of them in person and bring back any product they had that was in the affected lots, and then we destroyed it. A lot of it had already been sold, and we didn't know of any illnesses associated with the PCA product, but there could have been some that we just didn't know about, too.
Well, Bill, as you look back on those experiences, essentially of receiving an ingredient, would you suggest any kind of screening on your behalf as a processor prior to implementing that product into your subsequent production?
Well, you raise an interesting question, Andy. There's a lot of debate about when to screen, how much to screen, and what to do to screen. My thought on it is at least spot checking ingredients that are sensitive. Well, not spot checking. I'd test every lot of those. You can ask for a certificate of analysis on them and specify the things you want them to be testing for, which we did after the PCA outbreak on all nut products. Had to be salmonella-free, for one thing, or negative on 25 grams. Depends on the sampling system you use, but negative for some amount, 25 or 375 grams. And a certificate of analysis is one way to do that. Another one is to spot check the lots yourself, which is a good idea, but it can be expensive. And another way is to have certified or approved suppliers which have gone through that regimen and have had audits that involve testing of product and environmental sampling and all that too. So there's a number of ways to do it. It isn't cost effective to test every ingredient. It's just what is the degree of risk. If you're talking about, for instance, a dried milk powder, there's a fairly high possibility it could be salmonella contaminated. Peanuts, on the other hand, at least until PCA, were considered a very low-risk product, and in fact, we have had 3 instances now where we've had salmonella-contaminated peanut butter. The first one was in 2006. The second one was associated with PCA, where King Nut Company made some of their nuts into peanut butter, and recently there was a Smucker's recall on salmonella-contaminated peanut butter as well. So it turns out in practice that the old definition of a potentially hazardous food, which comes from my restaurant background, is kind of out the window, because under the right circumstances, anything can become potentially hazardous. Witness such things as salmonella on dry cereal, which has happened a couple of times, botulism in baked potatoes, fried onions, and gravies, botulism in oil-infused or garlic-infused oil, and so on and so forth. A lot of things we never thought would happen have happened. And things like that always will, so we have to be a step ahead of the microorganisms, because they are so small and reproduce so quickly that they keep changing. And there are now, I believe, 7 stecks or shigatoxin producing E. coli like 015787. So they are ever evolving, and our food safety systems must keep pace.
Well, Bill, you've given us a wonderful look into the world of food inspections, food quality, food risk management in the production and both the restaurant area. You've given us excellent advice about how to respond to a governmental audit of your facility, and I'm sure our audience has picked up a lot of little side hints from your years of experience. Would you like to, in the closing minutes, to summarize our discussion today and then kind of give a little bit of advice to maybe some of our newer entrants into the profession?
Where would you like me to start?
Well, just summarize today's conversation and then offer some sage advice to our newbies to the food safety profession.
Okay, well, take food safety very seriously, because it is a serious business. Unfortunately, it is not possible to totally eliminate the risk of someone becoming ill, but we can work, and we need to work all the time to make that possibility less and less likely. And you need to get trained in HACCP, or FDA has a number of retail food safety programs, which are all very good. Don't be afraid of your regulatory agencies. They're there to do a job, and they are there to help. So they're not the enemy. They're not the bad guy. Yes, they can make life miserable for you, but work with them. They're there to help, and we all have the same goal, which is to produce safe, quality food. No one should ever have to worry about getting sick from eating lunch. Unfortunately, it does happen, and it will continue to happen, but we need to make that possibility as rare as we can.
Well, Bill, with that, I thank you for your time and your wonderful interview today, and look forward to hearing of your future successes in the food protection arena.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Andy. It was very interesting, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too.
Bye now.